Good morning, everyone. We had a little giggle there, I guess, when Ekavir read the way he did. Little acting up here. But it's interesting. Swami said a very interesting thing. He said our culture hasn't prepared us for spiritual living. And of course, it's true, but it really, I was thinking a lot about that comment that he made as I was contemplating this talk today and thinking about us particularly. I mean, living here in Silicon Valley as we do, and in this, any Western culture, but in this culture, really where everything that we're taught that is good or that we'll get rewarded for or that we can feel good about ourselves, really almost all of it has to do with accomplishing something outside of ourselves. It really has to do with feeding the ego. We don't always think of those things that way, but that's simply the truth. We've been learned to do well in school, we feel good about ourselves, get the right jobs, find the right partner, get the right house. It's just sort of endless, and it really is all about the ego. So to have a prayer up here where somebody really gets our attention, where that ego is saying, take care of me, take care of me. It's really exactly what Swami was referring to. There's very little that most of us, at least, have grown up with that points us in the direction of spiritual growth and of spiritual well-being and of attaining spiritual goals. We're some of those people who have been blessed because we found our way here by God's grace. We found our way here. I have no idea if Swamiji had this in his conscious mind as he wrote these repeating readings and lessons. But of course, this lesson comes every year right around the date of Master's Mahasamadhi. Mahasamadhi being the conscious last exit from the body of a great saint. And that date is March 7th, and we celebrated that event here last night with just a beautiful service. I'm not sure if it was recorded or not, but if it was, it's worth going back and watching people just reading and singing about or to Master, sometimes through his own words, sometimes through Swamiji's words, throughout the whole evening. And it wasn't until I was in the evening, even though I had something to do with the planning of it, that I realized just how it was telling us the whole story of his life and really bringing to us all of those very deeply meaningful lessons that Master came to teach us, which is really what the reading is about. Dogma, of course, which are truths, which are important. We all need to have truths, but sometimes we glom onto them in ways that certainly don't help us grow. That's the best of it. Sometimes they have us look utterly foolish. There's the story that I've told before about greeting a patient of mine in an urgent care clinic, and somehow I mentioned Christ. How I did that in the middle of a 15-minute visit, I don't know, but I did. And he looked at me and he said to me, "Oh, are you a Christian?" And I thought about it and I said, "I am, but you wouldn't believe that." And so he wanted to have a discussion about it, but we went on and treated whatever it was, his cough or whatever. Then as he was leaving, he turned to me, "Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the only begotten Son of God and he died on the cross for our sins?" And he went on, and his 15 minutes were long since up. So I said to him, I felt really sheepish about it, but I said to him, "No." And then he looked at me and he said, "How did you know I wouldn't believe you were a Christian?" And there's also that wonderful story that Master tells. I think it was true, I don't know, about some evangelical Christian who was having a discussion with Master, and Master said to him, well, what do you make out of, because he was interpreting the Bible so literally, that's what he wanted to do. He said, what do you make out of the fact that the snake spoke? And the man got very thoughtful, sort of looked like he was going inside, and then he said, well, in those days, snakes spoke. Just made perfect sense. So that is maybe where dogma goes into dogmatism, and at least it can provide us with some comic relief, but we wouldn't want to base our spiritual welfare on it. And then Master, or Jesus in this case, but Master also talks about common sense. And interestingly, right in the very same reading, they first say the common sense is based in intuition, and then Swamiji goes on to say, but don't stop there. And in fact, common sense can really get in our way because it can prevent us from rising spiritually, because common sense, for most of us, is still a thing of the mind. I think that's where we begin to be informed a little bit by intuition. But the last bit of spiritual growing that we want to do, which is why the avatars come, which is why Master came, is because they want to show us the way to have conscious contact with God, to really perceive the truth, to experience our own infinite reality, which is, of course, the only way that we can really relate to God. And unfortunately, this is not possible from a place of ego consciousness. It's only possible from a place of soul consciousness. So we need to find a way to transcend the ego. Not an easy thing to do because it has a hold on us. It does its job of keeping us in the rational mind so beautifully. But how is it that we're going to transcend that? And of course, the answer is that we have to find an enlightened being. That is the only way. If we attune our consciousness to one who is fully enlightened. Because, again, Master says, Jesus says, to know something, we have to be that something. We can't think about it. That's the problem with the rational mind. No amount of thinking, analyzing, wondering about, arguing about God is ever going to show us what God is. Hence, Shankya said thousands of years ago, God cannot be proved. And that's simply the truth. This is an experience that we have to have, and we have to find a way to have that experience. We are not capable of doing this on our own. Being confined in the ego as we are just makes it virtually impossible. In the Gita, there's a beautiful phrase in there where Krishna says to Arjuna, "Thou canst see me with immortal eyes, therefore I give thee sight divine." It's such a beautiful offering. You can't possibly see this from where you are, he says to this beautiful disciple, Arjuna. There's a wonderful story. I don't know if it's in autobiography or where it is, but it's about Sri Yukteswar, who, when he was younger, this is not an experience that he had with Lahiri Mahashaya, his guru, but he went to another teacher. He went to a retreat, basically, with another teacher. And the way this teacher taught was that he had everybody read a stanza from the Gita. Just read it, and then he said it quietly. Just keep reading it over and over, which they did. for about a half an hour. And then he said, let's meditate on that now for 30 minutes. So they all got very quiet for 30 minutes. And then he made a comment or two, very briefly, about the teaching. And then he asked them to meditate again for an hour. And at the end of the hour, he said to all of his students, does anybody here think that they've understood these words? And after a moment's pause, one of the students said, I do. I think I understand it. And the teacher thought for a minute, and he said, no, not yet. And then he asked them to meditate for another hour, which they did. And at the end of the hour, he let everyone in the room go, except for Sri Yukteswar. And he said to him, do you believe that you understand the meaning in these words? And Sri Yukteswar said, my eyes have passed over these words many times, but no, I don't think I've yet fully understood the meaning of these words. And with that, the teacher just smiled at him and blessed him and let him go. Really, to know something is to be it. And Sri Yukteswar was wise enough in that moment to say, I don't know this yet. And this is how he went on to teach Master. And this is how Master went on to teach Swamiji. And how Swamiji went on to teach all of us. Really, by saying, Sri Yukteswar used to say to Master, you must know this. Meaning, you must become it. Excuse me. It raised for me, when I was looking at this last night, also the difference between intelligence, again, based on where we live, and wisdom. Because again, we are a society and an area, excuse me, that prides itself on being so intelligent, but unless we offer that intelligence up into something greater than we are, where it can be transformed into wisdom, you know, discoveries are made, books are written, things happen, but nothing that is truly great, nothing that is truly inspired can happen without bringing in that element of wisdom. I remember when I was in medical school, and I've mentioned this before, after every single clerkship that we would go through, we would be evaluated. And those evaluations meant a lot. You can imagine you're coming in as a medical student, and here are some of the greatest minds in the whole world who are going to put on paper who you are and how you just did. And they matter. They mattered for what residency you were going to get into, but I think they mattered mostly, or at least in large part, to our ego. And one day it came to me that I had to look at who these people were who were evaluating me. I had to consider how I felt about them, because I don't think I had these words for it then, but I was looking more for wisdom. Certainly I was surrounded by a lot of very bright people, but I had to ask myself, are these the people that I want to emulate, even from Stanford University? And there were a lot of very, very intelligent, very smart people, but those that had attained true wisdom were actually few and far between. You know, Swamiji ran into this. He said this, so many of us have read it. He was constantly being told by so many of the other disciples. You know, he was young. He was 23 years old, and he was there, and Many of those disciples were much older than him. There was a lot of advice being given to him all the time. And he started getting confused, he said. Finally, he realized what mattered to him. And he would say to them, did Master say that? Because if Master said that, then he knew that he would believe it. But only if Master said it. Only if it came from that place of pure wisdom. Understanding that intelligence needed to be offered up into the divine flow, into that place of expanded consciousness. And he knew that that's what Master had to offer. That's why Master was here, to be that guide for us, to take us to this place that we were trying to go. So even he realized he had to do a lot of sorting out. What Sri Yukteswar said to Master that was so dear about this knowing, he said to him, I want you to use your two eyes of reason, and then I will give you your third eye of wisdom. Such a beautiful way of saying that. And those masters have a way of imparting that knowledge then. It's an energetic exchange. That's the only way we're going to make it to this place of perceiving the truth, of knowing this infinite reality. I know Asha's told us the story many times of walking into an auditorium at Stanford and from the back of the room knowing this is the man I want to spend my time with. This is the man who could teach me everything I need to know. She walked into an auditorium. He hadn't even spoken. I remember when I spent some years with another Indian teacher whose name was Sant Keshavadas, and I've mentioned him to many of you before. He taught in a way called Hari Katha, which is that you sing the teachings. So it was very lovely. He would sing all these lessons from the Ramayana and from the Bhagavad Gita. So you could be engaged, but the problem is he was always doing it in another language, or in many languages that I didn't know, languages I had never even heard. And yet very often I would know what he was singing about. It was a miracle, but it was a miracle based on that kind of energy exchange that these great masters bring to us. You know, it raises this issue that is really the reading today is focused on, which is, how is it that we find a true teacher? What are we looking for? Because we're already establishing that all we have to use is our mind. And we already know that our mind is already biased. You see, this is a very interesting issue, that when we think of superconsciousness, Satchitananda, truth, wisdom, bliss, those states that we are wanting to attain, they're kind of irreducible. You can't explain them because they explain everything in the universe. It's virtually impossible to get our minds around that. But we have to leave our mind. It's like the story where the man was going to try and poison the demon. But the demon said, before you even put the poison in the powder, I was already in the powder. You can't cure something with the disease that it has. We can't use our mind to make the kind of progress that we all want to make. So we need a teacher. And then our reading says, be careful. when you go to choose your teachers. Be careful. So, and then in a very biblical way, well, it does go on to say in a pretty clear way, judge it by its fruits, but the reading says a few other things. And so, what qualities is it that we would look for? How do we decide who we want to be near, who can help us grow, who can help us expand our consciousness? We can start by asking ourselves, how do we feel in their presence? Is it inspiring? And we all know that for ourselves. That's something we can all feel if we stop and we tune in. I remember the day that I was sitting in a synagogue, having been born and raised Jewish, listening to a rabbi, and it was Yom Kippur, and the thought came to me, this is not inspiring. I was very young. I didn't think of it the way I would now, but it was very clear to me that I was not being helped to feel expansive more than what I was. I didn't feel like I was being held up and stretched. I felt like I was being talked to. It was very different. I didn't even like the message he was sending that day, but nothing about him or those lessons was inspiring to me. Do we feel inspired? Does the teacher feel calm? Do we feel calm? Swamiji says, look at these teachers. Ask yourself, how are they holding themselves? Do you feel that their hearts are open? Do they smile? Do you have a feeling that what they're offering you is really for you? Or is there any other gain that they would be looking for? Do you feel that they have transcended likes and dislikes? These are things that we can begin to know. This is the direction that we're moving. We are all have our own inherent wisdom. And then we want to grow, and we want to grow in the presence of the great ones. We have to go down this path believing in ourselves. We have to offer ourselves up. Those of us in this room, we've already been drawn by this beautiful avatar, by Swami Kriyananda, his disciple. So we're already on this path. You know, in our purification ceremony every Sunday morning, many of you come, and as I've said before, many of you don't. It's a very beautiful service. But the final blessing at the very end, somebody's come before one of the light bearers who are acting as a channel for these masters. The last thing that we say in their name is, by the grace of our masters, you are free. It's such a beautiful line, such a beautiful affirmation. This is what they want for us. They don't even just want it for us. They see us as being free. They know we're free. That's why we say that every week. That's why we have to let that in. That's why we're taught these beautiful techniques, these exquisite techniques. I was thinking of the Om technique that is one of the techniques that we learn in our series of meditation classes. And what that means to really practice that so that we can be guided to move into that place of superconsciousness. Master said, when you're resting in Om, nothing can touch you, nothing can hurt you. Of course it can't, because to be hearing that sound of the manifestation of superconsciousness, it's really what it is. Then we are indivisible. Nothing can hurt us. This is what Jesus said as he was leaving. He said, I leave you with the Comforter. Isn't that just a beautiful word? The Comforter, that's the Om. That's the Amen. That's what we're moving towards. That's what these masters want for us. there's a wonderful little bit of Greek mythology that I'll end with today. That's the story of Ariadne and the thread that he leaves for, I have these notes here so that I would remember his name, Theseus, as he goes into the labyrinth and he's looking for the Minotaur, which really I had to look it up, but it translates as the bull-headed one. And he's really going in there to conquer that, which of course represents our ego. And Ariadne gives him a spool of thread, this pure gold, to take into the labyrinth so that when he wants to find his way back out, he can just follow the golden thread. And that bit of mythology came to me last night because I realized it is exactly what these teachers, the ones that Swamiji's encouraging us to find, what our masters, it's exactly what they do with such love, such devotion, such assurance, just saying, absolutely, yes, you are this already. Just follow the thread of my heart, my love. I will bring pure wisdom to you. You just attune yourself to me, and then you will realize the truth of all that you already are.